Battlefield 6 recently dropped a new update on November 11, and we're going to be getting another new update pretty soon that's going to be fixing quite a lot of issues in the game, including problems with challenges, unlocks, things like that. Now, of course, there's still some stuff that's bugged, but hopefully they're going to be pushing out all these fixes in the next coming days. There was a change that was kind of made, and it wasn't really announced, but it was sort of pushed into the update as well, which was changes to the player count on some of the maps in Breakthrough, which is definitely an interesting decision that has kind of not really gotten a lot of positive reception from many Battlefield 6 players, myself included, and personally I think that something else should have been done instead of what the devs actually did. So that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about in today's video, as well as what the devs are planning on doing with Breakthrough in general for the future. So before we do that, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications set to all so you don't miss out on any of the Battlefield 6 content here on the channel, and let's just dive right on into it. So Battlefield 6 has multiple different modes that you can choose from, and the big three tend to be obviously Conquest, Escalation, and Breakthrough. They're pretty much the core of any Battlefield game. Of course, there's many other modes in Battlefield, and there's a lot of other modes in Battlefield 6, but for the most part, I guess when you ask anybody what they imagine first in Battlefield, it would probably be Conquest, Escalation, and Breakthrough. Now, personally, I've actually played a lot of Breakthrough, and it's been one of my favorite modes because I like how chaotic it is, how action-packed it is, how intense it is. It's a very different vibe compared to Conquest, which is more about being strategic, flanking, trying to actually have a strategy, so to speak. Breakthrough is more about push head first, go crazy type of stuff. Each mode, I think, has its own sort of benefit to it and has its own sort of style that makes it different. Even Escalation, as similar as it is in a way to something like Conquest, Escalation still has its own vibe to it that kind of works for it as a mode. So when you want to play each one, you want the experience that each one brings you. Now, Breakthrough has been on pretty much every map, and the Breakthrough map is a bit of a different look than the standard Conquest map because of the way you kind of are restricted in specific areas until you can push through into the next area. So you get a limited space to play, and you've got 64 total players on each map typically, and that's kind of how it was for a long time. Now, at launch and during the open beta, some of the maps did have 48 players, and then they kind of switched to 64 total. Now, obviously with 64 total players in a relatively smaller, more compact space, it can get pretty chaotic pretty quickly, but for the most part, that's kind of what people expect when they are playing Breakthrough, not something that has more slow down times and strategy, just more chaos. And for me, that was one of the reasons why I enjoyed Breakthrough, because each map had its own sort of dimensions and had its own kind of feel in Breakthrough. Now, while yes, it is very crazy and sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming when you have 64 total players on the Breakthrough maps, and yeah, sometimes some people do want to get some room to breathe, I think in general, Breakthrough kind of feels like, to me, the mode where you don't really want to take a break, you just kind of want to keep going through and go crazy in it. So what the devs did recently was reduce the actual player count on most of the maps. Pretty much every single map in Battlefield 6, Breakthrough now has 48 total players, so 24 on each team, except for two, Operation Firestorm and Merak Valley. Those are the only two now that have 64 total Breakthrough matches, because these tend to be bigger. So basically, I think the problem that happened with Breakthrough in general in Battlefield 6 isn't necessarily the player count, because I do think Breakthrough needs to have a lot of players so that it can feel as action-packed as it should feel. Like Merak Valley and Operation Firestorm, obviously having 64 total players makes sense. I think the issue that occurred was the other maps like Empire State, Manhattan Bridge, Siege of Cairo, New Sobek City, they're smaller maps. Obviously, the smaller a map is, the more condensed the space is, and it's much more face-to-face in Breakthrough. So in some of the matches I played, especially on New Sobek City, this was very apparent, where you kind of had just almost direct contact the entire time with the enemy team if you were pushing forward a lot. So I don't think that changing the player count was the proper solution in this case. I think that it was just a fault with the way the maps were set up for Breakthrough that created this situation where some players felt like it was just too chaotic constantly without any basically moment to kind of think. Now, some of the maps are fine with 48 players. They're small enough where you almost don't really feel a difference, and actually it might be better for the flow. For example, Empire State, I feel like that one makes sense to have 48 players on, but I don't think that, for instance, Manhattan Bridge needed only 48 players, those sorts of things. And for the most part, I just think that the issue isn't really Breakthrough as a mode or the player count, it's just the map balance, which is pretty much what everybody's been saying about Battlefield 6 from the beginning, that as As much as these maps are fun, I think the way they're set up just makes it so that these modes aren't being properly implemented, and it's causing an issue with the player experience. And looks like, to me, what they're doing right now is testing, because it makes sense if they wanted to kind of just do this quietly. They didn't really say that they did it out loud. This was something that players spotted, and basically I think what they're trying to do is see how the actual reception and the data shows from players in these matches when they reduce or increase the player count on different maps. So it's very likely we might see in a few days from now that 64 players are back on specific maps and not on others. I think that right now what they're doing is testing the balance on the map. Because basically what they said they're already going to be doing for Breakthrough is readjusting the layout of some of these maps for the mode. So in the December update, which is the final update in Season 1, or the Winter Offensive update, they're going to be making changes to some of the maps in Breakthrough, changing the layouts, those sorts of things. So it seems like what they've already found from their data, because most of these decisions that they're making are based off of collected data. So it looks like whatever their data kind of showed them pointed to the fact that Breakthrough right now is kind of busted with the way these maps are set up. So the other day I played a couple of matches of Breakthrough when it was still 64 across all the maps. I played on New Sobek City, Merak Valley, and I also played it on, I do believe it was Empire State. And personally, I felt like Merak Valley had a good number of players. It made sense. The map is wide enough and big enough that it just works on Breakthrough. Meanwhile, with New Sobek City, I kind of felt like it was in the middle. Sometimes it was a little bit too chaotic and it felt like you couldn't really advance anyways, and other times it felt like it was just the perfect amount of chaos. And then finally with Empire State, that map felt, in general, I'm not a fan of Empire State, I'll just put that out there. I think that it's one of the worst maps in the game right now, but with Breakthrough on Empire State, it just felt like there was almost no room to do anything in general, because it's just kind of an open, basically zone where there's nothing other than just everyone in this one area basically. So I think the balance of Empire State was really implemented kind of wrongly for Breakthrough. Even in general, Empire State just kind of feels so weird in this game with Conquest and things like that, where you want to enjoy it, but at the same time, there's so many random corridors and hallways that lead to closed off doors that do nothing. There's just giant open spaces everywhere. There's not really a lot of strategizing that you can do on Empire State. Manhattan Bridge, I kind of feel like in general is not my favorite map, but it's not my least favorite map either. I think Breakthrough on that one works pretty well, and I don't think that it needed less players. I also think in general Manhattan Bridge does a relatively decent job of kind of bridging the experience of something like Empire State and the experience of something like one of the better maps in the game, Siege of Cairo. So it sits somewhere in kind of the middle there. I don't see why Siege of Cairo had its player count reduced either, because I think that that map is relatively large enough where you could do 64 player Breakthrough on it without a problem. It works fine for 48, but I do think 64 just makes it a little bit more high energy, if that makes sense. I think for the most part, what the devs need to do is just ensure that they're striking a balance between map size, map layout, and actual fun, because you don't want obviously Breakthrough to be a camp fest where nobody's doing anything, and you don't want Breakthrough to be so insanely chaotic to the point where you can't do anything anyways. So I do think that a proper balance needs to be struck there. For the most part though, I do enjoy Breakthrough, and I will kind of miss having those crazy larger player counts and the more insane kind of plays that you can make on there, but I do think hopefully though by the December update we'll have a much better Breakthrough experience if they can tailor it right with the new maps and the old maps and things like that. Hopefully what they do now will actually bode well for future maps in this game, such as whatever maps are going to be coming out in Season 2, because if they can fix the balance now, then we can actually just get a good experience from the get-go in the following seasons. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, how you feel about the fact that they are changing the Breakthrough player count, how you feel about the maps, and which maps do you think are better for Breakthrough versus the others. Leave a like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications set to all so you can stay up to date with all the latest content, and that's all for today, folks.